Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the food transformation food system transformation session and land use. I will be the moderator for this session. My name is Hiroko Kuniya, and I'm the executive director for the SDGs project for the Asahi Shimbun. Food is about everybody. Currently, our food system is unsustainable for the people and for the planet. COVID-19 exposed to us very clearly how the food system is vulnerable to sudden disruptions. It is a situation that we're facing is what World Food Program calls a hunger pandemic. So we are regressing on what we have achieved on the SDGs. Globally, 2 billion people do not have access to safe, nutritious, and sufficient food. Millions of people go hungry and go to bed hungry at night. And also the food system, the impact on the environment is very serious. Roughly a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions is from food system. It is the largest single driver of land degradation and massive deforestation and biodiversity loss. Also, if I could add one more point, is that about 30% of the food is wasted or lost. Now, looking ahead, we are facing unprecedented population growth. Right now, the global population is 7.7 billion, and it is growing towards 10 billion in 2050. The planet must feed 10 billion people. So the challenge we face is that we need to produce more, at the same time, protect and restore the environment, create a sustainable, resilient food system that is inclusive and improves livelihoods of the farmers. The food system needs to be, therefore, radically transformed very quickly. How can we put effective actions on track, bring solutions to scale, to reshape the food system? Now, let me introduce our panel. We had a fantastic panel. First, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mark Rutte. Netherlands is a leading exporter of agricultural products and services. The country has been in the cutting edge in transforming the efficiency of the food system. Next, Jeffrey Liu Mingfang. He's the Chief Executive Officer of China Mengniu Dairy. It is the largest dairy company in China, and China is expected to see significant increase in the demand for food, including dairy products. Next, Geraldine Machat is the Co-Chief Executive Officer and Chief Financial Officer of the Royal DSM. Royal DSM is a leader in the food space, working to advance sustainability and the nutrition agenda. Last but not least is David Beasley, Executive Director of the United Nations World Food Program. WFP was awarded the 2020 Nobel Peace Prize, and it stands at the forefront to support people who are suffering from hunger. Welcome, thank you all for joining us. Now, to put it straightforwardly, the food system is extremely complex. Experts say if we want to transform the food system, we need technological transformation, we need behavioral transformation, and we need policy transformation. But I think I'd like to focus a little bit on the potential that we have on the technology and innovation in the beginning of this session. If we are going to achieve agricultural sector that is good for people and the planet, Mr. Prime Minister, I'd like to ask you, the Netherlands, the agricultural sector has been the leader in transforming efficiency of the food system. What role must innovation play? And which are the areas where collective action can be transformative in shaping the food system?
First of all, good morning from the Netherlands, and thank you all for participating. And Mrs. Hiroko Kuniya, thank you so much for moderating this very important session. I think we could easily say that COVID-19 has shown that if the scientific community, but also the public and private sectors and civil organizations and individuals, if they all feel this sense of urgency and perform global collective action, that we can tackle these emergencies together. And that means we have to, I believe, to focus on three things. One is, of course, the UN Food Systems Summit in September. We simply have to make sure that it will be a success. I believe it should be a moment we can look back on as a turning point. Secondly, to your point, Madam Moderator, the science and data, because they have proven key in tackling the crisis for COVID-19 and play a crucial role in addressing the climate crisis. And similarly, science should be more visible in a way to inform us how we improve policies, how we improve food production and markets for food. In the near future, as we all know, we'll need to feed 10 billion people worldwide. And then third, the role of businesses in the agri-food sector should be stimulated. And I'm so happy that the company we are very proud of, that it is based here in the Netherlands, Royal DSM, is also part of this panel. So the role of businesses in the agri-food sector should be stimulated and enabled to create scalable solutions. And here I'd like to highlight a World Economic Forum initiative in this regard, the World Economic Forum Food Innovation Hubs. And these hubs in Africa, in Asia, in South America and in Europe will allow businesses to connect regional stakeholders to skill innovations, because this is key, skill innovations that can address food systems challenges. And here I'm particularly proud to announce that the Netherlands will host the Global Coordinating Secretariat of the World Economic Forum Food Innovation Hubs, which will connect all other food innovation hubs. And I believe this is important because it will be facilitating to create the partnerships we need. So it's all three together. The UN, science and data, but also the role of the business community and how to leverage and scale up what is happening there. So that would be my first reaction, Madam Moderator, to your question.
Mr. Prime Minister, I think for many of the viewers there, it's the first time they are hearing about the food innovation hubs. And so if you may explain a little bit more about what the objective is and what the significance is, why you are making regional innovation hubs. What is the objective?
Well, to be very clear, what we need to do here, it particularly has to do with the role of, yes, science and data. It has to do, of course, with the UN system, but particularly here what we need to achieve is that the role of the business community and the way they can help us to create these solutions. But then particularly the question, and I had these discussions many times with the big companies here in the Netherlands, Unilever, Royal DSM, others in the food sector. How can we not only make use in our countries of what is happening in these companies, but these companies themselves have a worldwide reach. So it's not just the world community or governments which will enable the scalability. We also need here the impact of the business community. And to support this, it's crucial that we have, and this is a particular new initiative by the World Economic Forum, that we have these innovation hubs. But then, if you would have them only at a global level, we all feel that we would miss out in terms of what is needed in particular areas. And that is why we need them in the regions. We think in the big geographical regions like Africa and Asia, but also South America and Europe. so that we have the business community to connect with, in these areas, the regional stakeholders. And that is particularly important because otherwise these innovations cannot get scaled. Maybe we'll hear later from Geraldine Matchett from Royal DSM on what they are doing in the area of food security. They're doing some fantastic research. And when I'm in New Zealand or wherever I'm in the world, I am confronted with these innovations by Royal DSM. But then the question is, how do you make sure that they get not only scalable in the Western world, but also in Africa and in Asia at large? But also, when you have these regional hubs, of course, it's also crucially important that we somehow connect what is happening there. And that is why we are so proud here to host this global coordinating secretariat.
Okay. Mr. Prime Minister, I think I will ask you about the importance of these hubs a little bit later on, but since you mentioned Geraldine, I would be very much interested in hearing about what DSM is doing in trying to improve sustainability in the food system with the technologies and the researches that you're doing.
Thank you very much.
What is the role of innovation?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. And I have to say, we're extremely excited by this announcement that's coming out today. It is the culmination of quite a lot of work that's been going on already in the pre-UN Food Summit, System Summit that is coming up in 2021. And to give you a few examples, here are the 3 areas where I think these innovation hubs are going to be critical. In our view, firstly, the farmer needs to earn more when producing food sustainably. Now, this is very, very much doable, whether it is through carbon sequestration, regenerative agriculture, no-tilling technologies, more biodiversity. These are all examples where the science is there, and we have a lot of colleagues that are more upstream in the food system, whether it be Syngenta or Yara, who are doing a lot of work on these things with the ministries, with the organizations, civil society as well. So there's a whole part of, if we truly want to change the food systems, the farmers need to be better off when they do the right things for the planet and for the consumers. So that's one area. And we mentioned, amongst others, there's a lot of talk about carbon sequestration in soil, but there's also, of course, reducing methane from livestock, one of the most impactful greenhouse gas. And the science is there, but connecting all of the players to scale it has always been the biggest challenge. So that's one area. Farmers need to be better off when they do the right things. The second area is consumers need to have more choice and realize that diets matter. And you mentioned, Madam Moderator, in your introductory comments, the impact of the COVID crisis. Now, one thing we have certainly noticed in this crisis, and it is a sad reflection of maybe a lot of societies, is that parts of our societies have been hit much more than others, financially by losing their jobs, limited access to medical care, but also a lower nutritious status. And the relationship between general health and nutrition and resilience when there's such a crisis is critical. So the nutritional content of food and having the right diets is not just an option, it's not a luxury. It is something that countries need to help in putting in place. Now, all the players in the food system need to collaborate for this, but it has to be both a policy decision, a supply decision, and an innovation decision. And here again, the technology exists. So the nutritional status of people, the ability to change that exists. So that's the third area. And then you need to connect it all. And this is all about transparency. And here there's again a lot of innovation and technology. It's about connecting the supply side with the demand. It's about having the farm to fork transparency so that people can truly make the right choices and we can help the different players across the value chain. But for that requires legislation and technology put together. So these hubs are absolutely the right way forward. And we're certainly very excited about the announcement, but also the fact that we feel that we can truly contribute with this in place. And I'm not even referring here to, the fact that it's regional. And I'm sure David Beasley will be very eloquent in highlighting the different needs of different geographies, because the mindset and the needs of Europe, for instance, or Asia, very different from Africa. And there is technology innovation available for all, but it needs to be customed for the region. They're really different challenges in different places.
Thank you, Geraldine. Before I go to David Beasley, I think I'd like to ask Jeffrey. You're the largest dairy producer in China, and what is your reaction to this initiative? And where do you think you can play a role?
Great, thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon for those who are in Asia. I'm Jeffrey from Mengniu Dairy, one of the largest dairy company in China. Now, I probably will take the COVID-19 impact as the example. This is a typical disconnection of the entire supply chain, which is actually, from farm to desk, the waste and efficiency loss are largely, increased, which resulted an even bigger impact on the sustainability of the food system. So COVID-19 is probably just a amplification of the problems that we already have existing for quite some long time. Now, in our industry, actually, people who been very, very well known that the dairy industry have a very long supply chain, as well as, even on the finished product perspective, we have a range of big products. But if I just to focus on one thing, which is, as mentioned by already Geraldine, the transparency of demand and the supply, and to bring that into a data platform so that you will significantly increase the efficiency and also reduce the waste along the chain. Taking a very simple example, in the system we have been starting to work on is we know exactly, how much of, the feeds we have to grow in the very beginning and how much we have to produce at the farm side, as well as in the feeding system and then in the manufacturing system. So when you have all these data available, and we are talking about also a large scale, today we are produce roughly around 9 million tons of product each year, right? If you look at that scale, and if you look at if we can already put some of the data transparency in the system, we can reduce a lot of the waste. We can reduce a lot of the CO2 emission along the logistics system, where we are moving around almost 10 million, ton of foods, right? So these are all the things we have, been doing in a large scale to shorten the distance between demand and supply by implementing the data system and the transparency along the entire chain, so that you will see a significant improve in the efficiency on the food system itself. And then obviously the other area we are also very focusing on is on the nutrition system. What is the right nutrition? Through education, because we are reaching almost 90% of the Chinese family, with 1.4 billion people. So along the way that we are moving a lot of the effort to the education of what is the right level of nutrition, and also about food waste, etc. But all these will have to do based on a data and technology improvement, based on a large-scale application along the way with all the partners who are working with us today. So I think, I'm being very excited about this, because this will be a full transformation of a very old industry, which is dairy, into a new era, which is, basically we starting putting all the platform in place so that everybody and our partners, our consumer, our farmers can see that, and the efficiency will significantly be improved.
Right. David, thank you for waiting. I have two questions for you. One is, Jeffrey just talked about the potential of technologies, how that could improve sustainability or the efficiency. What have you seen on the ground through helping people in this very difficult situation? How technology has provided better outreach for the people, And also, secondly, this initiative that the minister introduced gears to custom-made approaches for transforming the food system. So having been on the ground, why do you believe custom-made approaches are necessary? So two questions. What technologies have you utilized in helping people throughout COVID, and why custom-made approaches?
Rocco, great. I'll give all that to you about an hour, and I'll try to do it in about a minute and a half. But, as the Prime Minister was saying, you've got to really look at this at a geographical, regional context, because what may be working in the mountainous areas of Afghanistan won't necessarily work in Niger or Mali or Burkina Faso. So you really got to look at the global context and what works in different places. And that's why the innovation accelerator that we do using e-commerce, cell phones to connect farmers to markets, as well as buyers to different markets as well. We've got that going on. We spent about $300 million last year in just this type of technology and innovation. And so the Innovation Hub, I think that's just rolling out, and it's really going to have a major impact. But, in some places, and this is what we need to think about, because it's two very different contexts. One is you look, as you said, Hiroko, the population of Earth will be about 10 billion people in a couple of years. We're struggling now because 700 million people go to bed hungry. 270 million because of COVID are really on the brink of starvation. Now imagine what's going to happen when we get to 10 billion people. And so right now, the struggles are mostly in the poor countries. But what do you think is going to happen when we don't have enough food in Brussels or in Chicago or Berlin? So you've got to look at the poor countries and the wealthy, because we're talking about supply chain disruptions along with better technologies, e-commerce, hydroponics, what we're doing now, like in Algeria, blockchain technology, satellite imagery, all the new technology, better seeds, better fertilizers. But in some of the countries, with some of the innovation, what we're doing now, we used to just bring food in. Now we're putting a couple of $1 billion worth of monies into the local smallholder farmer market opportunities and creating, kind of priming the pump to get things moving along. And so here's what I think has been one of the greatest innovations in the last 20 years, 30 years, is, in my opinion, the United Nations shunned the private sector. But it's an extraordinary new spirit at the United Nations, in that how can the private sector help us solve the problems out there? And so what we're doing now, whether it's with the Unilevers, the DSM, Geraldine and I have had several conversations just in the past couple of weeks, along with Bayer, Yara, and the list of companies that goes on. My question is not how can the private sector help the United Nations, but how can the United Nations help the private sector be more strategic, more engaged in countries around the world? Yes, we're working on post-harvest losses, better hermetic practices, and we could delve into that to a great degree, but not enough time here. But one of the things that I was talking with Geraldine a couple of weeks ago, along with some other CEOs, is the private sector, particularly in smallholder in developing nations, how can you bring your practices there, integrate, but not displace the smallholder farmers, but actually integrate them more strategically? Because if we continue the same path, we're going to have destabilization when we displace workforce. So we've got to be more efficient, but more strategic and politically sensitive at the same time. And let me make this one last comment, because people say the food systems is broken. It's not broken. 200 years ago, 95% of the people on Earth were in extreme poverty, and that was with 1.1 billion people. Today, 7.7 billion, less than 10% of the people are in extreme poverty. Now, so we built and designed a system that really is improved and substantial success, but try telling that to the 10% that aren't getting an appreciation of this great asset, sharing. And so we've got to continue to work the system. We got to make certain that we are less vulnerable to COVID type impacts. There are going to be more of those. And as I've told folks, if you think you had trouble getting toilet paper in New York because of supply chain disruption, what do you think's happening in Chad and Niger and Mali and places like that? So we do need to work to improve the system, but we do need to make sure we don't tear down the systems that are reaching 90% of the world's population. We've got a lot of work to do, a lot of innovation, a lot of creativity. And as the Prime Minister said, it's not just one size fits all. And Hiroko, we've got to continue to try all these different dynamics, because I can tell you, and I know I need to wrap this up, but just in the past few years with our beneficiaries and ecosystems and trying to environmentally improve the planet, our beneficiaries who reap the consequences of the wealthy nations' carbon consumption. Our beneficiaries just in the last few years literally planted over 6 billion trees. We rehabilitated over 3.5 million acres of land using half moons and just basic fundamental practices that are just absolutely critical to the people surviving in some of these areas because of flash floods and droughts. And just in the last couple of years, over 53,000 holding ponds, reservoirs, wells. And so one of the things that I tell donors, if you will work with us and what we can do, because we have about we assist about 100 million people, but 10 million of them are engaged in building water wells and feeder roads. And I can keep going on because quite
David,
frankly,
I think
anyway, Hiroko, let me throw it back to you.
I'm going to cut you short now because I think you can list all the achievements and we'll run out of time. When we talk about the food system, you're right. The humanity has been extremely successful in being able to provide more food in the 20th century, but that is now giving us a backlash of, it is the environment footprint, the carbon footprint is being hard, it is soil degradation and so much, it is not sustainable. And experts say, and I want to ask perhaps Geraldine, they say that we know what to do, and I think the understanding that the food system needs to change is spreading, but action gap is the big problem. Action doesn't get scaled up. So what is the missing link of this issue? Is it the sort of the sense of urgency is not being shared, or is it the finance, or is it the policy? If you put your finger on the problem, what do you think is the problem of not being able to scale up action?
Hiroko, I love your question because this is really where I get a lot of energy looking at 2021. And the reason I say this is if we look back to the year of the COVID pandemic, what it has brought to light is that these crises don't stop at borders. Everyone gets impacted. And when we discussed with David the number of people on the brink of starvation, it's the combination of the issues that we knew before, plus climate change, plus COVID. And when you put all of that, you see a tripling of people on the brink of starvation. Now, I truly believe that in 2021, the sense of urgency is finally going to come out, that when we talk about climate change, the first place it's going to hit, and it will hit everybody, is food. When food goes wrong, there's social instability, there's economic issues, there's migration, there's all sorts of disruption. However, this year we have COP26, we have the UN Food Systems Summit, and when you put those two together, it is the perfect platform to, first and foremost, actually create the burning platform realization that this is right now. And you're absolutely right. The food issues, yes, it's about quantity, but it's also about how it's produced and whether it's nutritious. And a lot of the focus has been about quantity of food to meet the number of people, but how we produce it is either a spiraling downward issue of degradation of the ecosystems, or it can be a spiraling up of doing it in the right way for the planet, but also for the consumers. But it all starts with awareness. I truly believe that the human race, actually, once it really realizes the crisis is there, it can act very fast. And we saw it last year. The speed at which everybody across society reacted to the threat of the pandemic, whether it be on innovation, new policies, new behaviors, new technologies, it was a matter of days. It wasn't even weeks. So I think our biggest priority for all of us listening to this is how do we, not in a kind of exaggerated way, but very factually based, raise the awareness that climate change is first and foremost a challenge to our sustainable food systems, and that is where efforts need to go. Finance technology can be arranged.
Mr. Prime Minister, as Geraldine said, if this present situation is compounded with climate change, we should be very aware that there might be a rapid collapse of the food production. And this sense of urgency is spreading, but not probably enough. What, from your point of view, what is missing in trying to scale up the efforts and the transformation?
Well, I think that is the core question which we need to address, and I would like to build and amplify on what both David and Geraldine have been saying. And we all have seen the cartoon, I think in the pre-meeting material, where we see the waves of COVID, but then the recession, the climate change, and the biodiversity collapse. And I think that's exactly what we are facing at the moment. And I would argue, but I would love to hear the views of the other members on the panel, that we need to do a few things at the same time. Crucial here is, I believe, a whole of society approach, and that means that, of course, as I think we're all saying, the private sector needs to be on board. There we have the scalability. It is the entire value chain from farm to fork, so to say. And there, I think it was also the executive director, David, building on mentioning this, the small, the medium-sized, and the large businesses like DSM working together, because they collectively feed the world. It's not governments feeding the world. It is the whole of the value chain doing this. And that means that I believe there are some great promises when we look forward, and which will also help us in getting the rest of society on board. And one always has to be the technological innovation. Just to mention one example, we have here in the Netherlands the project Geodata for water and agriculture, where digital tools help smallholders to learn how to sustainably raise their production. So it is a very practical tool which helps smallholders in all parts of the world. And a second one I'd like to mention is how can we work on generally sustainable agricultural practices, circular agriculture, agroecology, and above all, climate smart agriculture, as we have discussed so many times also at the World Economic Forum. We have seen a recent report, the International Finance Corporation says that climate smart agriculture has the highest green job creation potential of the 10 sectors studied, 40 jobs per $1 million invested. And my vision for the future is that we will see in many countries that, for example, in the Netherlands, we have 10 million jobs in the Netherlands. In 2030, probably 2 to 3 million of those jobs we do not know of at the moment. We do not know where these jobs will be, but we do know that many of these jobs here in the Netherlands will be linked somehow to the food industry, to the whole of the supply chain in the food sector. And this report shows you what the enormous impact on society is. So I would, in closing, would say it is yes, and the urgency of now, that we have to fight these waves, like the cartoon is putting on the table in the material for this meeting. But at the same time, we also have to stress the positive, that so much future growth potential and new jobs will come out of the innovations we are putting on the table now. And that will help us to come out of the COVID-19 crisis, to fight the recession. It will fight climate change. It will prevent the biodiversity collapse. So there are so many opportunities here at the same time.
Yeah, so it would be wonderful if we could create a positive cycle of the positive environment and positive employment and growth and so forth. Jeffrey, your sector is dairy, and I think the major issue is the greenhouse gas emissions. And what you have to do is to improve the nutrition of the Chinese people by promoting dairy products, but at the same time, you have to decrease the carbon footprint because animal protein is providing so much burden on the environment. What are the technologies and innovations that you are trying to adopt?
Thank you. I think, if you look at our industry, I have a couple of things to share based on this issue. The first thing I think is a leadership issue. I think that you require a very strong local leadership that share the same vision to achieve whatever we have agreed to, right? So we just said by 2030, China will be reaching the highest in terms of the CO2 emission. And then by 2060, we will be getting into neutral. So that is important. Once we set that mission, we will have to drive into that. Now, come back to particular what we are doing today is actually just some of the speakers have already shared. The technology we are now already start to share with our farmers is to help them to grow feeds, use less water, and also use less feeds when they feed the cows. We have implemented already a digital system on each of the cows. So we know the health situation of each cow and how much they eat, how many water they eat, and what are they producing. So you know exactly that in the level of consumption at each key point of the supply chain. So that will actually reduce already by 25% of the feed that go into the farms. And then obviously to produce 1 liter of milk, you have much less of a CO2 emission. So just taking that as an example. At the same time, we are also working on new technology to work on plant-based as well, because as you know, we are also working on a food nutrition platform for the consumer. At the same time, when we do education with consumer, we also talk about packaging, green packaging. We also talk about the waste. So we, along the way, for example, the recycling of our packaging have been also a significant one. When we do a test in a case like Shanghai, we are able to achieve 95% of the recycle of the package. So that's also a very significant move. But again, coming back to my point, has to be a clear leadership, a shared vision, and then along the way, a roadmap for every sector. I think every sector private sector have their own issues about food system. But if we have that, and if we have a roadmap of actions, I'm sure it will significantly help for the transformation of the entire food system.
Thank you. Jeffrey mentioned leadership. My question is there enough leadership? I've been hearing a lot about transformation of energy and climate change. And I haven't heard leaders speak about the food system change so much. So David and Mr. Prime Minister, you mentioned about the food summit and that there's a nutrition summit also, and there's COP. We are lacking leadership in this field. I wonder how you can mobilize more leadership action. David or Mr. Prime Minister, who wants to take this question?
Well, I always yield to the Prime Minister. But let me say this. One of the things that bothered me in the last few years, because we had crises all over the world, from climate extremes, war, and the number of people marching to the brink of starvation. When I arrived 4 years ago at the World Food Program, was 80 million people. And then pre-COVID, it spiked to 135 million. The question was why? Man-made conflict, wars and conflicts in dozens of places all over the world, and then climate extremes on top of that. And what was happening in the international media, you turned on the news around the world, and it was Trump, 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 or Brexit, 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 now COVID, COVID, and we literally had hundreds of millions of people on the brink of starvation, and the media just wasn't covering it. But now people are beginning to wake up and step up. COVID, I think, exacerbated a vulnerable supply chain system and food systems, of which so much success has been made, but it's very vulnerable, and we've got a lot more work to do. Because what leaders are now beginning to recognize, and this is the reality we're facing in 2021 with 270 million people on the brink of starvation. If we don't receive the support and the funds that we need, you will have mass famine, starvation, you'll have destabilization of nations, and you'll have mass migration. And the cost of that is 1,000 times more. So I believe you're beginning to see leaders step up and recognize we need to address short-term and long-term solutions. And like the Prime Minister stepping up here, I think this is just a good example of the future that leaders, because the United Nations Security Council for the first time passed a resolution recognizing clearly the correlation between food security and political stability and safety and security of nations. So I think we're on a new path now. Now we've got to act on it and move forward.
Mr. Prime Minister, can you mobilize more leadership?
I will do whatever I can, and if David helps me and Geraldine and Jeffrey, then we can do that. But let me just underpin that, because when you look at the numbers, 840 million people worldwide are not assured of access to enough food. I mean, this number is staggering. Secondly, the various crises the world is faced with, not just COVID, but coming after COVID, the recession, the climate change, and the biodiversity collapse. And at the same time, the huge opportunity in terms of future job creation, which will be necessary to fight off the recession, which will be necessary to fight off climate change and therefore the biodiversity collapse. And that's why I think the three themes coming through in this meeting are so crucial, which is, yes, we need the world on board, the UN system on board. Yes, we need the technological innovations, and at the same time we need the scalability power of our small but also our medium-sized and bigger worldwide operating companies. And when we do that in conjunction, the case for change is enormous and is compelling and is in your face, both on the dramatic side as well as to be a bit more optimistic on the opportunity side. And I think if we can collectively do this. And then finally, when leaders are talking about that, it's crucial that they are not just pontificating these things in meetings like this, but also show, and I will see what I can do more in this area, also show at the national level what they do in their national dialogues to make this happen. And that will also add to the let's say, whether it is believable what they are saying, whether other people believe what they are saying, because it is putting the money where their mouth is. They are putting words into action, and that also has to be done at the national level. Of course, that is where national leaders are most effective, and from which they will get their authority to talk about these issues in panels like this. And I'm not saying I'm the perfect example here, because we are doing not enough on this issue, but I will promise you that we will do more on this, and also at the national level, so that next time I can speak with more authority on this issue.
Okay, thank you. Maybe this is the last question. I'd like to pose it to Geraldine. What will be, we need more business participation. We need to stimulate the business activity in the field. What is missing?
What is missing? I think what is missing is a collective belief that we can make the change happen fast. I think there is a certain view that in the food system, things take a long time, and that therefore it's a very gradual, progressive process, when in fact, change can happen fast. And when we align all of our technologies end to end, we can make the difference. And for me, what really is missing, if I think practically about what's been in our way, it's the ability to connect from end to end, from the planetary impact of producing the raw materials of food to the processing, to the consumer diets choices, and the transparency across that. So our biggest challenge as an industry is to see how do we connect all together with the help of the public sector, with the help of the NGOs to make it happen, that we have this transparency across end-to-end. And I would like to add a little wink to the work on the ESG disclosures, because I think the more companies report as a private sector how we contribute to the SDGs, how we contribute to the non-financial impacts of our activities, the more this will help us connect both upstream and downstream to work together. So the convergence on ESG disclosures is also a very important step that is happening right now.
Okay, we're out of time. I'd like to thank all the panelists for joining us. And
if I may add just one point, just
Jeffrey,
adding what.
okay.
Yeah, sorry. If I were to add one point on what Geraldine said, I think it's also along the long chain of all these partners who should take it positively. When you talk about this, you know, people might think it's a negative thing, but there's a huge of opportunity in this area on technology, on efficiency, on creating new jobs. So all these partners, when they are joining, we should have a common belief. It is positive. It will generate more positive impact financially, but also economic, socially.
Fully agreed.
Great. Thank you so much. We're out of time. Thank you all for joining us, and goodbye.